The belief that the right
I can tell you what Christmas is all about.
You tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Hello, you're listening to Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth, brought to you in part by Liberty One Tech. You can find them at libertyoneTech.com, as well as the Unknown America Project. You can find out more about that at theunknownamerica.com. This broadcast is part of the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. My name is Michael Hart, and this is Unknown America. You know, in the book, The Life of Reason, philosopher, writer, and essayist George Santayana famously penned the words, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And what he was referring to is the failures that occur when people do not learn from their past mistakes and continue in their misguided ways. And in somewhat of a larger sense, the tragedies that can occur when societies fail to learn, buries the truth of their mistakes, ignores or revises atrocities, or worse, simply forgets. Over the last several centuries, whether through human error, false reporting, or simple neglect, history has all too often been a victim of forgetfulness or, in many cases, revision. While this program is full of historical trivia that many people have either forgotten, never knew, or never were even taught, it also serves to set the record straight by smashing some of the most enduring myths and outright lies that have persisted throughout the history of this country. During this program, you'll learn about some of the most famous Americans that shaped this nation, as well as people you may never have heard of that the history books have ignored until now, whose stories were forgotten or considered simply not worth telling. During this program, you'll also learn some pretty fascinating facts about American culture and even some of the little-known oddities of the American experience. You know, there's a lot of history in the past, and unfortunately, too much of it ignored, changed to fit a narrative, or deemed not worthy of being taught. So be prepared to be amazed while you learn about some of the most fascinating people, places, plans, and peculiarities that make up the Unknown America. On today's program, we're going to take a trip and explore the electricity wars, the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, media, and the mystery of Mecklenburg, the real reason for the Battle of the Alamo, the truth behind the Star-Spangled Banner, and a Titanic coincidence or devious plot. We'll get into that all on this edition of Unknown America. It's very important right up front that folks understand that the primary impetus behind what we do on this program is to demonstrate in no uncertain terms that not only have history books been revised or changed, and sometimes it's just purposeful, other times it's on purpose, sometimes it's perfectly innocent, and other times it's to advance an agenda, which is simply not true. But as we continue to watch the ever-changing fabric of America today, this program is not just about American history or myths or trivia. It's a warning to all people out there that people need to be aware that there is somewhat of a political illusion that takes place each and every day. And I am talking about compliments of the news media in particular. And although I attempt to be as nonpartisan as I can during this program, it is important to realize that I take exception with many of the things that are going on in the nation around us, and I use the stories from America's past as an example of exactly what I'm speaking of, that you always have to have a jaundiced eye when it comes to doing or looking or reading anything that is put out there for your consumption. For example, one of the stories that is pretty much lost to history, and most of the things that we're talking about on this program are either in Unknown America or in Unknown America 2, and also the children's version, which will be coming out hopefully in the next 30 to 45 days. But it was actually May 20th, 1775, in Charlotte, that the Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, declared its independence from the British Crown, or at least that's what the media reported. The Mecklenburg Declaration is one of the most hotly debated issues among historians of United States history. If true, this would mean that Mecklenburg, North Carolina, would have declared its independence from the Crown over a year before the colonies did. Now, the authenticity of the Mecklenburg Declaration has been disputed ever since it was published 44 years after it was supposedly written. There's no conclusive evidence to confirm that the original documents ever existed, and no reference to it has been made or found in any newspapers from the year 1775. Most historians believe that the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence myth was due to a misinterpretation of an authentic document known as the Mecklenburg Resolves. Now, the Mecklenburg Resolves were a set of resolutions that were passed in May of 1775. But these resolves were hardly a declaration of independence, although the resolves were in fact published in newspapers. The text of the Mecklenburg Resolves was lost after the American Revolution and not rediscovered until 1838. Many historians believe that the Mecklenburg Declaration was probably written in 1800 in an attempt to recreate the Mecklenburg Resolves from memory. Whoever wrote the Mecklenburg Declaration probably believed that these resolves had been a declaration of independence, and so recreated the resolves with language borrowed from the United States Declaration of Independence. So entrenched in North Carolina history, the date May 20th, 1775, is displayed on both the state seal and flag. Yes, North Carolinians believe that they declared their independence first. But while this ongoing debate may seem just historical water under the bridge, and that it really doesn't matter, and frankly it doesn't, it's how the story came to be commonly accepted, at least in North Carolina, that's the real issue. The Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence was published on April 30th of 1819 in an article written by a guy by the name of Joseph Alexander in the Raleigh Register, as well as the North Carolina Gazette. Up to this point, little discussion of the event was ever mentioned in any press in that state. Now, while true, the author's father had been at the meeting of the resolves the day before, it was not until Junior penned the article that the embellished myth would begin to take shape. This is not terribly similar or dissimilar from the story of Betsy Ross. It wasn't until a relative reports that the myth takes hold. Same thing with this declaration. But now I want to explain a little bit more why it's important to what goes on in the narrative, because it's a myth made possible by a press that made very little attempt at validating the veracity of the claims. Then, because it makes it into one paper, the 1819 article is reprinted in newspapers all across the country. People began to notice that even though the Mecklenburg Declaration was supposedly written more than a year before the U.S. Declaration of Independence, that the two declarations had some very similar phrases. Now, this story got so much traction at the time that even John Adams, who is now in retirement when the Declaration air quotes, version of Mecklenburg was published in 1819, John Adams assumed that Thomas Jefferson had actually copied the spirit and the expressions verbatim into the Declaration of Independence, which was read July 4th, 1776. Yes, Adams thought that Thomas Jefferson plagiarized a Declaration of Independence that never existed, when in fact the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence had plagiarized Jefferson. Adams was from North Carolina, had never previously mentioned it. He also found it suspicious that the original was somehow lost in a fire, the dog ate it story, and that most eyewitnesses were now dead. Now, also you have to bear in mind that the only state that abstained, at least originally, it took a couple of weeks, New York did not leave or did not honor the Declaration of Independence for a couple of weeks after the other 12 did. But if the Mecklenburg Declaration had existed, why would North Carolina have gone along with the 12 colonies? And that's kind of the point that Jefferson's making now. He also found it suspicious, again, that it was lost in a fire and that the eyewitnesses to it, supposedly, were all dead. Jefferson did, of course, respond to John Adams, and Adams, in his reply to Jefferson, informed him that he had convinced him that the Mecklenburg resolutions were, in fact, fiction. Adams forwarded Jefferson's letter to the editor of the Massachusetts newspaper, who wrote an article expressing reservations about the Mecklenburg Declaration. Although now publicly in dispute, the myth was cast in U.S. history. And although this story is just a little fun aside in U.S. history, it does, yet again, demonstrate the news media has a long history of reporting as fact news stories that are often inaccurate, misleading, or just false. And again, emphasizes the importance of never taking as gospel what they choose to portray as factual. Yes, human error does occur, but so do agendas, narratives, and an unfortunate willingness to deceive, whether purposeful or out of just sheer laziness. You can find out more about this by going to theunknownamerica.com. Very few people, very few students of American history are even remotely familiar with the Mecklenburg Declaration and the amazing rifts that it caused throughout the early days of this country, as well as the relationship of John Adams. Fun little odd fact here for you on Unknown America, brought to you by the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. Did you know that during Prohibition, the U.S. government, in an effort to persuade Americans to swear off booze, poisoned some alcohol with the intent of making people sick? Yep. The result, over 10,000 Americans died. Never saw that in the history book, did you? That's kind of a point. You never really will. Some of the other stories that we're taking a look at today include the electricity wars, the Battle of Athens, Tennessee. We're going to revise the Alamo, talk a bit about some of the inaccuracies that people believe about the Star-Spangled Banner, as well as a Titanic coincidence, perhaps, but it could be just a devious plot. Well, there's a whole lot to talk about today, and we're going to do just that. When we take a real quick break, reload this coffee pot, because I got to tell you, it takes an awful lot of Java to keep these lips going. You're listening to Unknown America right here in the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. We'll be back in 90 seconds. Heart of America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100-plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support. In the early 20th century, a battle of sorts broke out between competing inventors. During this time, Thomas Edison had established direct current as the standard for electricity distribution and was living very comfortably off the patent royalties that he was concerned about losing when George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla introduced alternating current. Worried about losing his livelihood, Edison set out to discredit the new method. One strategy that he employed was staged animal electrocutions. It was in 1903 that Topsy the elephant was electrocuted at Luna Park Zoo on Coney Island. Captured on film by Edison, the event was just a string of demonstrations that Edison used in an attempt to discredit the newly introduced alternating current, which, if it posed any immediate danger at all, was only to the future of Edison's direct current. Hence the sacrifice of animals in an attempt to discredit the competition, and the public displays and accusations hurled back and forth between the inventors came to be known as the Electricity Wars. And speaking of battles and wars, shortly after World War II, voter fraud was running rampant throughout much of the Deep South. Never heard that before. Forged ballots and secret vote counts were very commonplace, and it was in 1946 in McMinn County, Tennessee, when the frustration reached its boiling point. Although federal authorities were asked to intervene, the calls for oversight fell on deaf ears, and it was early August of 1946 the locals used armed force to ensure fair outcome in their local elections. So here's how it went down. It was in 1936 when a man named Paul Cantrell was elected sheriff of McMinn County, and he would serve as sheriff 3 times. After serving the 3 terms as sheriff, he was then elected to a state Senate seat in 1942 and again in 1944. One of Cantrell's associates was a man named Pat Mansfield, the elected sheriff during the time Cantrell served in the Tennessee State Senate. But in 1946, Cantrell decided he wanted the office of sheriff back. But Cantrell was about to meet with some anticipated opposition. After the end of World War II, some 3,000 veterans returned to McMinn County. These veterans were seasoned by hard fighting in the European and Pacific theaters of war. They decided to put up one of their own, a man by the name of Knox Henry, to run as a candidate for sheriff in the primary election against Cantrell. Now, these GIs promised honest election to the voters as part of their platform for the county government. During the primary election, 200 armed men were brought in by the local political machine to act as deputies at the polls. Newly returned veteran poll watchers were not allowed into the area where ballots were being counted, and Sheriff Mansfield ordered his deputies to disperse the public. One of the deputies raised his gun and called out, "If you son of a bitches cross the street, I'll kill you." Not to be intimidated, the hardened GIs decided to find themselves some weapons and take matters into their own hands. The National Guard and State Guard armories had M1 rifles, British Enfield rifles, and some .45 cals. On August 2nd, the GIs bombed the jail with dynamite, and the deputies surrendered. They then took control of the jail and held the deputies overnight until calm was restored. With the ballots counted, the GI candidate for Sheriff, Henry, won by a 3-2 margin. The skirmish became known as the Battle of Athens and demonstrated how American patriots can restore the rule of law by legitimately ousting corrupt politicians, even by force of arms if necessary. Yeah, the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, stands as an example of what patriotic Americans can do to protect themselves from government tyranny. Do you see how applicable all this stuff is to the news of the day? People seem to forget the things that have taken place in this country and how quickly people are to go along with the status quo, whatever your political stripe might be, because people simply don't know the truth. A lot of it's been whitewashed, and a lot of it's been glamorized as well. And this was a story that, I'll be honest with you, I was a little ambivalent to put in the book, just because there's some things in Unknown America that challenge people's beliefs, but also that calls into question other people's intentions, and not always from the perspective of just how the media can mangle reality. And I also am not trying to portray the media as bad all the way around. You know, that's the same kind of mindset that, you know, makes people draw conclusions about police or whatever particular aspect of culture, that real archetypical response to things. So the media oftentimes gets it wrong just because they don't verify. But the problem is that they don't verify, they publish stories that end up in the history books, and then sometimes those stories are a little over-glamorized. For example, it's been a common refrain in American history books for decades. Remember the Alamo. As the story goes, the Battle of the Alamo was pivotal. It was a pivotal event in Texas's fight for independence. Following a 13-day siege, Mexican troops under the command of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna launched an assault on the Alamo Mission near San Antonio de Bexar, which is modern-day San Antonio, of course, killing all of the defenders. Now, Texas would eventually win their independence in the Battle of San Jacinto on the 21st of April of 1836. The story of the Alamo, however, has often been portrayed as somewhat of a micro-American revolution. A small band of motley rebels seeking independence takes on seemingly insurmountable odds in the fight for freedom and liberty. It's a great story, if only it was as honorable as history portrays. While the Alamo is surely a symbol of pride for many Texans, and those that perished there are certainly worthy of the banners of courage that history has bestowed upon them, it would be unfair to history to forget that it wasn't just freedom from Mexico's rule they risked their lives for, but for the purpose of maintaining their slave trading practices. Many people are not aware that Mexico had made slavery illegal in that territory, which they controlled, in 1830. Upon defeating Mexico and maintaining their slave status by winning their independence, the state of Texas would enter the U.S. as a slave-holding state in 1845. The only state to enter the way that they did in terms of by treaty. So while the story of the Alamo is one of bravery and heroics in the face of long odds, most history books fail to mention that the cause of the battle was not quite as noble as legend would suggest. Yes, Texas was seeking its independence. But again, because Mexico had outlawed slavery a full 34 years before the United States. There are several things throughout the history of this nation that are sometimes portrayed in a rather dark light, others that are portrayed as being much more honorable or valor-ridden than they truly are. And I think it's very important that we don't forget these things, because the reality of it is that the truth always resides in facts, and that's just an obvious statement. Matter of fact, it should be overwhelmingly obvious. But if we're going to be afraid of the truth, then we're going to be afraid of the facts. And if we're going to be afraid of the facts, then there's really nothing left for us to be concerned about or to build upon. Life is dicey. Life is not pretty at times. It can be challenging. And I don't mean just the life of individuals. I'm talking about this nation. There's a narrative which is being fostered in America today that is unfair to her history, because too many people believe things that either didn't occur or have been severely maligned. Now, not all of them. Some of them are just stories that have been omitted or things that have just been assumed incorrectly. One of those, and it's been taught in classrooms for years, and it drives me absolutely nuts, is the story of Francis Scott Key and the Star-Spangled Banner. There's a whole host of things wrong with this particular story. For example, Francis Scott Key actually intended his verses to be song lyrics, not poetry. Contrary to popular belief, the Star-Spangled Banner was not a poem set to a melody years later. Although Key was an amateur poet, when he composed his verses, he intended them to accompany a popular song of the day. Key wanted the words to be sung to the melody of Anacreon in Heaven. Although Key composed the patriotic lyrics amid much anti-British euphoria, To Anacreon in Heaven was ironically an English song that served as a theme song of the upper crust Anacreonotonic Society of London, which is a gentleman's club of musicians, doctors, and other intellectuals. And it was a bar song. A lot of alcohol in America's early days. Contrary to popular lore, Key was not imprisoned on a British warship when he wrote the verses. He was actually a Washington, D.C. lawyer that had been sent by President James Madison on a mission to Baltimore to negotiate for the release of Dr. William Beans, a prominent surgeon captured at the Battle of Bladensburg, along with John Stuart Skinner, a fellow lawyer working for the State Department. Key set sail on an American sloop, and on September 7, the two boarded the British ship Tonnant, where they secured the prisoners' release under one condition. They could not go ashore until after the British had attacked Baltimore. Then, accompanied by British guards on September 10, Key returned to the American sloop, from which he witnessed the bombardment of Fort McHenry. The song is not entitled The Star-Spangled Banner. When Key scrolled his lyrics on the back of the letter, he did not give them any title. It's a titleless song. Within a week, the verses were printed on broadsides and in Baltimore newspapers with the title Defense of Fort McHenry. In November, a Baltimore music store printed the patriotic song with sheet music for the first time under the more lyrical title, The Star-Spangled Banner, although technically it has no name. The flag, hailed to the twilight's last gleaming. And guess what? It didn't fly through the perilous fight. Mm-hmm. The night of the bombardment, a torrent of rain fell on Fort McHenry during the Battle of Baltimore. The fort's flag, the garrison flag, was 30 by 42 feet. It was so massive that it required 11 men to hoist when dry. And if waterlogged, the woolen banner would have weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 pounds and easily snapped the flagpole. So as the rain poured down, the smaller storm flag that measured 17 by 25 flew in its place. In the morning, they took down the storm flag and hoisted the bigger official flag. That's the one that Key saw. Symbolically speaking, an American flag did, literally, weather the storm. But the flag that Key gazed upon the next day was likely the unscathed garrison flag and not the battle-tattered flag, storm flag, that has been portrayed in so many pictures in American history. Along with Hail Columbia and Yankee Doodle, the Star-Spangled Banner was among the prevalent patriotic songs in the aftermath of the War of 1812. During the Civil War, the Star-Spangled Banner was an anthem for Union troops, and the song increased in popularity in the ensuing decades, which led to President Woodrow Wilson signing an executive order in 1916 designating it as the national anthem of the United States for all military ceremonies. It was on March 3rd of 1931, after 40 previous attempts had failed, that a measure passed Congress was signed into law and formally designated the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem of the United States. Most people do not realize that our national anthem is just the first verse of the song. When we sing this ballad at ball games, parades, and civic events, we are leaving out the last three verses of the Star-Spangled Banner. You know the first verse. For those of you that care to know the rest, the second verse reads, "On the shore dimly seen, through the midst of the deep, where the foe's haughty host is dread silent reposes, what is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half concealed, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected now shine on the stream, just a Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, long may it wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. And where is the band so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more? Their blood has wiped out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus be it ever, when free men shall stow between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with the victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the powers that have made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave." When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the Titanic coincidences, Wild West revisions, and maybe even get into Jane and her bar. Yeah, you're listening to Unknown America right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. We'll take a real quick one and come right back. Heart of America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100 plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support.
The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama,
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty.
I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about. Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about? Sure, Charlie Brown. I can tell you what Christmas is all about.
You tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
You're listening to Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities, right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. So many interesting things from America's past. Find out more by going over to theunknownamerica.com. This is a weekly segment that we do. Primarily, we're sharing with you stories from the book, things that we've researched and put together and compiled. But mostly what we're doing is we're busting the chops of the press, because that's what I love to do. You know, over the years, in doing talk radio and podcasting and writing and speaking, I've done a lot of programs and segments on conspiracy theories, not just things that the press has got wrong or things that people do not know. And some years ago, I did a real popular program when we were on the terrestrial signal out of Alabama that's dealing with these secret societies. And we're going to do a little bit more of that in the future. Might even write a book on it. But one of the things that was so interesting was a thing called the Report from Iron Mountain. Now, the Report from Iron Mountain was a book that was published by a company called Dial Press, and this was some years ago. Nobody really knows if the book was meant to be satirical or if it was a blueprint for what was going on or what was proposed to go on in America. And there's been a lot of conspiracies surrounding it. In the Iron Mountain Report, basically is a detailed plan of how the United States government needed to act and respond to manage people in the United States during prolonged periods of peace. And I'm being very serious about that. So in other words, too much peace. People start asking questions. You know, almost every despotic government in the entire world and world history has used war to keep their people in line. Not necessarily war against their people, but the common enemy approach. Like, you know, every time Saddam Hussein got in trouble, he'd attack the Ayatollahs over in Iran. That kind of stuff. And it's been going on just, you know, for many, 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 many centuries in this world. So the Iron Mountain Report was basically a plan for the federal government as to ways to keep Americans in line when they didn't have enough to worry about with a war going on. And, you know, in a similar fashion, you know, we've seen things like the book by Edward House, Colonel House, back in the Woodrow Wilson days. He wrote a book called Philip Drew Administrator, where he detailed his own plans to overthrow the government, basically, to get the Federal Reserve Act passed. And it was a real book. It was hiding there in plain sight. So there's always these conspiracies that have been floating around, and you know the idea that there are nefarious plans afoot. And another one that has really kind of gone under the radar over the years is one related to a book called Futility. In 1898, a full 14 years before the sinking of the Titanic, author Morgan Robertson penned a book called The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility. Again, the book was originally just called Futility, but eventually was renamed The Wreck of the Titan. The book has been the subject of much speculation and debate over the years due to the eerie similarities between the fictitious Titan and the Titanic. Now, I want you to remember what I just told you about Philip Drew, administrator. Okay? Let me take this full circle very quickly. Howard Taft is president, highly suspicious of a centralized bank, but he's also very popular. He's running for re-election. Some on the extreme left are concerned that they will not be able to get a centralized bank if Taft is reelected. Now, we're going all creature from Jekyll Island on you here. A lot of debate with Americans, European bankers, about a way to get Taft out of the way so that we can get the Federal Reserve Bank Act approved. Enter Teddy Roosevelt, also popular. Roosevelt runs as a third party, formerly Bull Moose. Siphons votes off of Taft. Woodrow Wilson wins. Colonel Edward House, who was his handler, puts his plan that was detailed in the book, Philip Drew, Administrator, into play. Okay. This gets us the Federal Reserve Act, which gives us the Federal Reserve Bank or central bank that's privatized for the most part, and European bankers and clandestine American groups throughout the entire world are making a fortune off the pennies in the backs of the American labor force. It was a nefarious plan all along. Now, hold that thought. Back to the Titanic. Don't y'all love the way all this stuff is intertwined? If that doesn't just give you the chills, I don't know what does. So, 1898. Morgan Robertson writes the book, The Wreck of the Titan. Over the years, due to the eerie similarities between the fictitious Titan and the Titanic, so similar are the two stories that some conspiracy-minded folks have theorized that Robertson was revealing a plan by the U.S. and European bankers to help advance the Federal Reserve Banking Act by intentionally sinking the Titanic. Why? Because some of the key opponents to the plan were on the boat. Now, you've got to bear in mind, what year did the Titanic go down? When were we debating about the Federal Reserve Banking Act? So you've got these very eerie similarities in terms of time-wise. So people think that Robertson is revealing some form of devious plan by the U.S. and European bankers, kind of what Colonel House did with Philip Drew, Administrator. Now, some have felt like these theories have been debunked, but there's some pretty amazing similarities between the Titan and the Titanic that continue to keep people wondering. For example, was the wreck of the Titan, or Futility, some form of prophecy, amazing coincidence, or does it expose a devious plan by European and American bankers to eliminate the opposition to the Federal Reserve Act? I'll let you decide. Some of the more uncanny comparisons include both the fictitious Titan and the Titanic were described as the largest craft afloat and the greatest works of men. These lines appeared in newspapers. The Titan was 800 feet long and displaced 45,000 tons. The Titanic was 882 feet long and displaced 46,000 tons. In the press, both ships were described as unsinkable. Both had a triple screw propeller, which would have been very high tech for the time. All right. Pretty circumstantial up to this point. Both ships were short on lifeboats. The Titan carried 24, which was as few as the law allowed. By comparison, the Titanic carried 20, which was as few as the law allowed. Both ships sunk after striking icebergs. The Titan was traveling at 25 knots when it struck an iceberg on its starboard side at night in the North Atlantic, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. Again, the Titan was traveling at 25 knots when it struck an iceberg on its starboard side, this is right side, at night in the North Atlantic, 400 miles from Newfoundland. By comparison, the Titanic was moving at 23 knots, struck an iceberg on its starboard side at night in the North Atlantic, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. The majority of the Titan's 2,500 passengers and crew died. 13 survived. The majority of the Titanic's 2,200 passengers and crew died in both situations due to the lack of lifeboats and the early departure by the few that were there. Both the disaster, the sinking of the Titanic, and the Titan, the fictitious Titan, occurred in the month of April. Amazing coincidence. Kind of amazing that the stories come out just a brief time, decade prior, right around that decade of the sinking of the Titanic. People on board were known to be in opposition to the Federal Reserve Act. And at the same time, we get a long shot Wilson elected president of the United States. Now that is what I call Unknown America. Let's have a little bit of fun before we wrap this edition up. I'm not sure how fun this is, but I do find it to be interesting, particularly for those of you that will be driving around today. There's a lot of 18-wheelers out there. A lot of you truck drivers might not know this either. It's that funny little bar that protrudes down on the back side of every trailer of every semi. Typically has red and silver stripes on it. On June 29, 1967, actress Jane Mansfield was traveling in a 1966 Buick Electra. She was on her way to New Orleans along with her lawyer boyfriend, Sam Brody, her driver, Ronnie Harrison, and 3 of her 5 children, after an appearance in Biloxi, Mississippi, when a dense fog from an anti-mosquito spray drifted over the highway. Unaware of a slow-moving tractor trailer in front of the car rammed into the semi and actually ran completely under the truck's trailer. All 3 adults were killed instantly, but miraculously her children all survived. The horrific deaths of Mansfield, who early reports had said had been decapitated, although this was later proven false. It was discovered the blonde hair lies in the car's windshield was actually just her wig. Brody and Harrison, they led to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to require all semi-truck trailers to be equipped with a DOT bar. To this day, this bar, more commonly known as a Mansfield bar, can be seen protruding down from the rear deck of semi-trailers across the country. and serves as a constant reminder of one of the most gruesome highway accident scenes in American automotive history. A little aside to this story, Mansfield was the mother of Mariska Hargitay. Hargitay is one of 3 surviving children, and she bears a scar from the accident to this very day. Something that a lot of folks may very well remember from the day was the execution in 1976 of Gary Gilmore. Gilmore had robbed and murdered a gas station employee named Max Jensen in Orem, Utah. The next night, he robbed and murdered another fellow by the name of Benny Bushnell, a motel manager in Provo, Utah. Gilmore was executed for the crimes by a firing squad on January 17th of 1977. This was at Utah State Prison. Prior to the execution, Gilmore was strapped to a chair with a wall of sandbags placed behind him. 5 local police officers stood concealed behind a curtain with 5 holes through which they aimed their rifles. When asked if he had any last words, Gilmore simply replied, "Let's do it." It has long been believed that Gilmore's famous last words were the inspiration behind one of the most famous advertising slogans in American history, Nike's "Just Do It." So much else to cover today, but let's wrap this bad boy up by taking Hollywood down just a notch and setting the record straight on the Wild West revision. The gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, didn't actually happen at a corral. Nope. It actually occurred in an alley behind a photographer's shop. Contrary to myth, because the press reported it this way, contrary to myth, it wasn't even much of a shootout. Lasted only around 30 seconds and had far fewer casualties than many other Old West dust-ups. Books and movies have reported what had sparked the shootout was a confrontation between cattle rustling outlaws and lawmen. However, for those of you that have seen the movie Tombstone, and it is a good movie, and I've watched it many times, and I will again, but the whole plot is wrong. Why? Because in reality, there was a plot between Ike Clanton and Wyatt Earp that was the real impetus for the shootout. The two had conspired to capture 3 other outlaws who were accused of robbing a stagecoach. Clanton would get the cash reward, and Wyatt Earp would get the credit. However, the 3 outlaws were killed before the plot could be unhatched. Clanton got paranoid, and friction between the two escalated as Clanton thought that he would be outed to his own gang as a rat. Portrayals of Doc Holliday, who was a dentist, by the way, by trade, as a real gunslinger, well, they've been slightly embellished. Holliday was actually diagnosed with tuberculosis at 22. The theory of the day was that the dry air of the desert was good for the lungs, so west he went. Once there, he found he couldn't make a living as a dentist, so he turned to gambling. Now, this career change forced Holliday to improve upon his gunslinging skills. And while he was a capable shot, he was not the blazing fast dead-eye history suggests. He was also very ashamed of being a professional gambler because it was the male equivalent of being a prostitute in the 1800s. He never told his family the truth about his life in Tombstone, but news spread fast after the gunfight, of which he did participate in, and once his family back in Atlanta got word of his activities, his father never spoke his name again. There's that scene in the movie where Doc Holliday and Wyatt are playing cards as the ailing Doc Holliday withers away in deathly despair and hands Wyatt a book that he wrote on his deathbed, "My friend, Wyatt Earp." Whatever. Doc and Wyatt were not good friends, as the movie has portrayed. Holliday was friends with Wyatt's brother Morgan, and frankly, until the day of the fight, they hardly had any interaction with each other at all. That's just a few of the little tidbits from Americana, The Unknown Americana, contained in the book The Unknown America, which is available at fine bookstores such as, well, everywhere. You can also get it on Amazon. You can download the Kindle version by simply Googling Unknown America by Michael Hart. It'll take you straight to the Kindle page, or if you prefer, just go to The Unknown America. You can order a copy of it there, where it will be autographed and come out free of charge with the Constitution. And there's shipping and handling, but there's also a Kindle link on that particular website if you prefer to download it. I think it's like $3.50 or something like that. We are so sincere about getting the information out and about, not just promoting the book, but promoting the fact that the media is full of it, that we'll, even if you download the Kindle version of it, you do have our permission, and Kindle makes this possible, by the way, to share it with family and friends absolutely free of charge. I don't know how that works. I'm an old guy. I still prefer to have a book in my hands, but for those of you that want to download your reading material, feel free to do it right there. We're going to wrap this thing up and remind you each and every Wednesday we do The Unknown America right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, we return to a regular news broadcasting through the prism of history. The entire Michael Hart Show is brought to you in a manner that we are breaking down the news of the day through the prism of the past, because if you don't understand the historical underpinnings of the stories of the day, they can be very frightful, even more frustrating, and frankly, they don't make any sense. People need to realize that much of what is going on in the nation around us today has occurred in the past, and in a lot of cases, what is going on today, just like it has been done in the last 200 or 300 years, has been historically maligned by a media that is sometimes compliant, oftentimes, well, falsifies, other times simply is cajoling with the facts, and the reality of it is they don't verify a lot of what's out there. That is why we call this the Unknown America Project. It's more than just about a book. It's about getting the narrative out that you can only believe about, half of what you see, and even less than what you hear. So that's it for us. Please tell somebody about the program. Do want to remind you this upcoming Friday's edition of the program, for those of you that are listening live, we are going to be doing our Situational Security Summit, talking about the Second Amendment guns rights as it relates to protection of our parishioners in our churches. That's it for me. You've been listening to Michael Hart right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. Please do us a favor. Circulate the program. Share it wherever you can. We appreciate you popping by, and we'll be back together with you very, very soon. Heart of America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth, explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100-plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support.